truthfully tell this story, I have to start with an explanation as to why I was there in the first place. In 2011, I decided to join the Peace Corps and was relocated to Nicaragua. And I spent 2 years in a small community named La Quinta that had roughly about 600 people in it, and it was in the Esteli region. The first few months, I was relatively shy. I spoke to the kids in my community and the family that I lived with, but did not have enough confidence in my Spanish abilities to talk to the other people. It was during these first few months that my Nicaraguan grandmother, Roselia, first told me the story of the Carretanagua. To be perfectly honest, the first time that she told me the story, I just nodded and pretended to understand. I didn't know enough Spanish to properly understand her, and she spoke with an accent that only other campesinos, slightly derogatory term for people that lived in poorer villages, could understand. It wasn't until halfway through my 2-year service that I understood enough Spanish to ask her to tell me the story of the Carretanagua. Again. It turns out, she told me this story because of my tendency to walk around at night while the rest of the village was asleep. She meant this as a cautionary tale. It is worth noting that my Spanish skills were not, and are not, the most adept in the world. What I have heard that night may not be perfectly translated. I will have some phrases in Spanish, which I will translate, but I find it necessary to include them to tell the story properly. It is also worth noting that she believed this story wholeheartedly. She truly believes that in her younger days, she was visited by La Carretanagua, and after hearing her story and having my own experiences, I do not know if I would be right in assuming that her story never happened. When my Nicaraguan grandmother was younger, she lived with her family. Like many families at the time, she had 10 brothers and sisters that lived in the same small house. And one day, over 70 years ago, her brother fell ill. She didn't tell me what sickness he had, but from the symptoms of fits of shivering and extreme sweating, I can make an educated guess that he had contracted malaria. He was bedridden, and because they lived in a small community, there was no hospital nearby. He continued in that condition for a few weeks. Eventually, her parents decided that they needed to go to the hospital and get medicine for him. The only problem was that they would both have to go and leave the children by themselves for a day. They decided that this was the best course of action and to put my grandmother, Roselia, in charge of the other children. They left the El Chipito, Little Cheap, under her care as well because traveling to the hospital would prove too strenuous for him. They left that day and she set to taking care of her brothers and sisters, feeding them, keeping them in line, as well as out of trouble, then sending the older boys up the mountain to tend to their crops of beans and rice. The day passed and the night fell. Roselia made sure all of her brothers and sisters were in bed, and that she had blown out the candles and was getting ready for bed, when she first heard the sounds of someone approaching her house in a cart. The cart's wheels groaned in protest as they traveled the dirt road. This groaning was joined by the rattling of chains that were dragging behind the cart. The cart came to a stop by the side of her house, and the driver of the cart went up to the front door and knocked. She opened the door to see a shadowy figure standing on her steps. Since she had already blown out the candles and it was the night of a new moon, she couldn't properly see the man. At first, she thought that it was her father, but then he spoke. "Hay un chupito aquí. Is there a cheap here?" She couldn't recognize the voice, but something about his tone set her on edge. She lied and told the stranger that he was still up on the mountains working. And the stranger was silent for a moment before he responded. "Vamos a ver. We shall see." He left and my grandmother closed the door. She listened to the cart ride off with rattling chains and groaning wheels. She went back to their shared room and checked on her little brother. He was hot to the touch and sweating despite the fact that he was in his underwear. She told me that he had felt so hot to the touch that it felt like he was touching a stone that had been left in the sun. And she was worried, but decided to try and get some sleep. She was drifting off to sleep when the sound of chains and creaking wheels returned to her house. There was more knocking on the door, and she got out of the bed and answered the front door. The shadowy man was there again. A few feet away, she could make out the shape of the 2 oxen that pulled his cart. They were extremely thin, and looked as if they were wan and sickly. And the man spoke again. Me fui a las montañas. Chepito no estuvo allá. Dime donde está. Shavaya. I went to the mountains. Sheep was not there. Tell me where he is, girl. Something about the man chilled her blood. And once again she lied to him and told him that he wasn't in the house. The man returned in a cold manner. Mentirosa. Dame la verdad o te voy a dar tus golpes. Él está muriendo. Dámelo a mí. Liar. Give me the truth or I will hurt you. He is dying. Give him to me. She knew that this man had ill intentions for her brother, so she said, he is sick, and went to town. Go there. The man turned and hopped in the cart, and he whipped the oxen, and they left. She tried to go back to bed, but could not sleep. And an hour later, she heard him return. This time, the sounds of the groaning wheels and rattling chains tore through the night air. It was almost deafening. As she listened to the groaning wooden wheels, she wondered if her mind was playing tricks on her. The groaning wheels almost sounded like the lamentations of men, and the rattling chains didn't sound like they were being dragged behind the cart, but were actually the sounds of people struggling against their bonds. She lit a candle and carried it to the front door. She opened the door before he could knock, and when the light hit him, she instantly regretted lighting a candle. Before her stood what remained of a man. His flesh had rotted away in places, and his lips had decayed long ago, leaving him with a sardonic, skeletal grin. His bones poked through what remained of his flesh. The candlelight illuminated his fiendish smile and the cart behind him. The oxen were not thin, but were actually made of bones. It was in this moment that she realized that this was La Carretanagua, and it was here for her brother's soul. What was once a man spoke, his words sliced into her like a sickle. Tú me conoces. Y yo sé que su hermanito está aquí. Él se va a morir esta noche. Trámalo a mí y tu familia no va a sufrir. You know me, and I know that your little brother is here. He is going to die tonight. Bring him to me and your family will not suffer. Rosalia was paralyzed with fear, but managed to tell the skeletal man that he could not enter her house without her permission. And he blew the dead air from what remained in his lungs through his exposed jaw and spoke. Bien pues. Very well. He stomped his right foot on the step, and the sound of bones striking stone echoed through the village. And after that, he left. Her brother didn't die that night. My grandmother finished the tale and went to bed. I decided to visit my neighbors and get a little more information about the myth of the Carretanagua. They told me that it was a Nicaraguan myth that matched perfectly with my grandmother's depiction. They told me that he visits houses of those who are dying to bear away the bodies. He takes the dying people somewhere and returns before the sun rises. The Carretanagua deposits the broken bodies on the steps of the houses he bore them away from, and states, Aquilo there. I leave it here. He cannot cross roads that intersect in the form of a cross, and he cannot enter houses without permission, and instead must convince people to let him in, or come out to meet him. The part about being unable to cross roads that intersected into a cross formation seemed ridiculous because, after all, doesn't every road intersect like that? It wasn't until I realized that many communities only had one road or path and never crossed another path. The Carretanagua was given free rein to travel through the villages and communities. The most disconcerting thing was the part left unmentioned. What happened to the people? Where did he take them, and what did he do to them to leave them broken and destroyed? We talked a little more, and when I mentioned my grandmother's story, her son, who was my neighbor, sighed and said, It is a shame what happened to them. I inquired further, and he revealed that Chip died 5 years later in the Contra Sandista War. He caught a bullet in the stomach and spent his last hours in agony waiting to die. Not only that, but Roselia's other family met tragic ends. Some died in accidents and some from heart attacks, some from drink, and some committed suicide by drinking insecticide. Almost every single one of her siblings were dead or dying from cancer and inoperable tumors. I thanked him and went to my room for the night. The story didn't scare me as much as the fates of her siblings. Could it just be a macabre coincidence or something more sinister like a curse? I never talked to my grandmother about her story. I let myself be convinced that it was just all a story, and it worked for a few months. The moment where my faith in that lie was shaken one night, as I was taking a walk around my village and breathing in the night air, and as I wandered around aimlessly and looked for a place to sneak a smoke, I sat on a stump by the side of the road. It was a quiet night and seemed more like one of those moments where the chaos and entropy of the world didn't seem to exist. As I sat there smoking my knockoff Belmont Suave, an ironic name because smoking a Belmont Smooth was the equivalent of smoking a cigarette composed entirely of hair and rubber in taste and smoothness. It was on the road that I became aware of the sound. A clink, clink, clink. There are a few carts in my community, so I didn't immediately make the connection. I listened as the sound grew, and something came into my view down the only road that cut through my community, dividing it in half. My adjusted eye could make out someone driving the oxen forward. And it wasn't until I was able to discern the oxen were pallid that I really began to get concerned. It plodded along at a methodical pace, and as the clink, clink, clink grew louder, I decided that I had enough, when the sound of wood groaning and straining like the sound of a creaky casket swinging open had reached my ears. My resolve completely broke. Now, I'm not easily spooked, but something about the similarities between my grandmother's story and this cart really freaked me out. As it drew closer to me, I decided not to test my luck. I stubbed out the smoldering half of my horrible cigarette and returned to my house with the sound of groaning wooden wheels and rattling chains growing ever louder behind me. I almost sprinted the last part of the way home, and I closed the door and locked it. In that moment, feeling relief washed over me, and I had never felt so foolish in my life. How could I let a little old lady's words get under my skin? I wanted to smile at myself for being so worked up. I wanted to laugh at myself for believing her. I wanted to cry. I wanted to say that I was able to brush it off, but to this very day, months after her story, the sound of wood groaning and chains rattling sets my heart racing and turns my blood cold. I come to weeping. Painful sobs rack my body. Each forlorn cry doubles me over, and I suddenly become aware that I don't know where I am or what I'm doing here. I feel like I just woke up from an extremely sad and disorienting dream. I take a quick blurry-eyed look at my surroundings. The night air is cool on my skin, and I appear to be in a wooded area. And I do not recognize where I am. The reason why I am crying settles on me like a miasma, and I immediately wish that I didn't know why I was this way. The emotional pathway has been pried open, and I suspect that once it is open, that it will never close like a door that has been rent from its hinges. I am weeping because I miss my children. I fervently pray that one day that they will return to me. But I know that what is dead can never return. And then I remember him. He was always nice, even when he was cruel. He had a smile that played across his lips when he gave me a kiss, or when he glanced me with his first. He was beautiful. I wondered why he picked someone as dirty as me. I was damaged goods, a mama soltera, and I was struggling to support 2 kids. He loved me even with my baggage, but there would always be something between us. The constant reminder that I was someone else's. I loved him, and he did his best to love me back. My tears burn their way down my cheek, and I wonder why there's nothing left in me except for love and hate. The sound snaps me out of my reverie. Someone snapped a twig a few feet behind me, and I ignore it. I'm too lost in the moment with my memories and my pain. And in the back of my mind, I know he's drawing closer. He kneels behind me and puts a hand on my lower back and asks what I'm doing in the woods at night. I recognize it truly is odd to see a woman weeping in the middle of nowhere. I turn to face him, and in an instant I see his face, and I am struck with the horrible realization. He looks just like him. I give a startled cry, and that sends him backwards onto his trasero. He has gone pale. He is a dead ringer. He could be his twin. He could be him. He is him. He scoots backwards, but I am on him in an instant. I crash down on him. My weight pinions him. My long nails rip at his face and his neck. He raises his hands to cover his face, but I change targets and tear into his unprotected stomach. I am lost in my rage. My eyes are bloodshot and tear-filled. At times I see him screaming in terror, and other times I see children weeping. I hear him begging me, and I hear him telling me that the children are in the way. I hear children weeping and pleading and shrieking as well. My attack slows, and I look over the damage that I have done. I have ripped him apart. And he twitches. But it has become a compulsory motion. He is dead. The image of my children's bloody, mewling faces have begun to fade. And the tears have stopped. I look closer at the man and realize that they really didn't look alike, but they probably acted the same, stringing on desperate women and trying to leave them. And I get up and I look at my blood-stained hands. I wander. I no longer want to think of the man. Something tugs at my mind, but I pay it no attention. Something like the low whine of a child sounds off in my head, but I ignore it. To think of it is surely the path to madness, and I don't think of it. My mind goes blank, and I'm swallowed up in a trance. I come to weeping. I cry out in despair. My throat burns, and I struggle to suck air into my lungs. Each sob pangs my entire body, and I suddenly become aware that I do not know where I am, what I'm doing here. La Llorona. El Coco. The name alone is enough to make kids pull the covers over their heads. Known across Spain, Portugal, and Latin America, El Coco, sometimes called El Cuco or El Cucuy, is the monster that parents whisper about when children won't behave. He is the shadow in the corner, the figure under the bed, the thing watching from the window, and the warning is always the same. Go to sleep, or El Coco will come for you. The legend goes back hundreds of years. The word Coco originally meant skull or grotesque head, and over time attached itself to a dark figure said to steal disobedient children away. When Spanish and Portuguese explorers carried their traditions overseas, El Coco traveled with them, taking on new forms in every culture that it touched. In some places he is a faceless shadow, in others a hairy beast, and in others still a hollow-headed figure that slips silently into your room at night. But here's the thing that's unsettling. El Coco isn't just folklore. He has been used as a tool. Parents sang lullabies warning that if their children didn't sleep, El Coco would come and eat them. Imagine being rocked to sleep with a song that doesn't soothe you, but terrifies you into silence. That is the power of El Coco. Fear used as discipline, a story sharpened into a weapon. And yet the legend didn't stay locked in old lullabies. It grew. Writers, filmmakers, and even Stephen King have drawn on El Coco, twisting him into everything from a shapeless child snatcher to a supernatural predator that feeds on grief. No matter how he appears, the core idea remains the same. He is the nightmare that comes alive when the lights go out. What makes El Coco endure isn't just tradition, it's adaptability. He becomes whatever a culture fears most. In Spain, he's faceless and hollow. In Mexico, he's a hairy monster waiting in the dark. And in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, he is the shadow outside your window. He's never pinned down, because fear itself is never pinned down. So when you lie awake at night, staring into the darkness, remember that legends like El Coco were never meant to vanish. They stick because they live where your mind is weakest, in the moments that you're alone, the moments that you doubt, the moments that you hear something move in the dark. And maybe he's just a story. Or maybe he's still out there, waiting for the sound of a restless child who refuses to close their eyes. Because the truth is, no matter what name you give him, El Coco, El Cuco, or El Cucuy, he's never really gone. Deep in the jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula, among the ruins of the ancient Maya, there's a legend that refuses to fade. The Maya speak of small, human-like beings called Los Aluches, spirits of the land, guardians of nature, and tricksters who blur the line between the living world and the unseen one. Descriptions vary, but most say Aluches look like miniature people, no taller than a child, dressed in traditional Maya clothing. Some accounts describe them as invisible to most adults, revealing themselves only to children or shamans. Others say that they can take on the shape of animals, owls, iguanas, even dogs, to move unnoticed. But their role is far more complex than simply being little forest creatures. According to Maya tradition, Aluches are tied to the natural world itself. Farmers once believed that by making offerings of corn, honey, or tobacco, they would win in Aluches' favor, ensuring rain for the crops or protection from thieves. Hunters left gifts in the forest, hoping the spirits would guide them toward game. For those who respected the land, the Aluches were protectors, but for those who disrespected it, the Aluches could turn against you. Stories tell of travelers lost in the jungle who suddenly hear laughter, or see small footprints that appear to disappear in the dirt. Others speak of mischievous tricks, tools moved out, huts knocked over, or paths twisted until you wander in circles for hours. In harsher tales, Aluches whip up sudden storms or illnesses to punish those who cut trees without permission, or who mock their existence. What's remarkable is that these beliefs aren't ancient history. They're alive even today. In rural Yucatan, construction projects have been delayed or rerouted because workers insisted on offerings must be made to the Aluches before breaking ground. In 2012, during preparations for a highway near the ruins of Uxmal, engineers were said to build a small shrine for the Aluches, just in case. The persistence of these stories isn't simply superstition. For the Maya, the Aluch embodies a deeper truth, that the land is alive. The jungles, the caves, the cenotes, they all have guardians. To ignore them is to risk imbalance. To acknowledge them is to show humility towards forces larger than ourselves. And that's why the legend endures. Because when you're alone in the Yucatan surrounded by dense vegetation and ancient ruins, the boundary between myth and reality feels thin. Every rustle in the leaves, every flash of movement at the edge of your vision, every sudden shift in the wind could be nothing. Or it could be an Alux, reminding you that you're not the only one here. So if you ever find yourself in the jungle and you hear laughter where no one should be, remember the old tradition. Leave a little offering, corn, honey, or tobacco, a gesture of respect. Because the Maya will tell you, whether you believe in them or not, the Aluches are watching. They call her La Niña de Negro, the girl in black. If you ever heard footsteps in an empty hallway, or felt a sudden chill in a place where there shouldn't be one, you'll understand why her story has unsettled people for decades. She isn't just another ghost tale told to frighten children before bed. She's a figure rooted in tragedy, whispered about in schools, cemeteries, and city streets across Latin America. The legend begins like so many others, with loss. Some versions say that she was a young girl struck down by illness, tuberculosis, scarlet fever, or even something stranger. Others claim that she was an orphan, mistreated, and left to wander the streets in mourning clothes. Wherever her origin lies, the one detail that every version agrees on is the image. A child, dressed head to toe in black, appearing in places heavy with silence. Eyewitnesses describe her as a small girl, perhaps no more than 10 or 12 years old. Her face pale and expressionless, her black dress old-fashioned, as if plucked from another century. Sometimes she is clutching a doll, and other times holding a book or a rosary. But the detail most often repeated is her eyes, dark, empty, and bottomless, like looking into the very absence of life. Her appearances often come with a pattern. In schools, children report seeing her standing in the corner of classrooms, or outside near the playground fence, watching but never moving. In cemeteries, caretakers say that she drifts between graves, silently placing small flowers where no visitors ever come. On roadsides, drivers have sworn that they've seen her suddenly appear, only to vanish when headlights touch her. Those who claim to see La Niña de Negro often describe strange misfortune afterward, illness, accidents, or a lingering sense of dread that never quite leaves. In some towns, parents warn children not to follow her, instead that if you look into her eyes for too long, she will take you with her, leading you into the afterlife. Others, however, believe that she isn't malevolent at all, that she's just a lost soul, wandering endlessly, desperate for someone to notice the pain that she carried in life. The story has taken root across many cultures. In Mexico, she is said to haunt abandoned schools and old hospitals. In part of Central America, she is tied to cemeteries where children were once buried in unmarked graves. And in Puerto Rico, she's whispered about as a restless orphan spirit caught between worlds. Each version paints her slightly differently, but all point back to the same tragic heart. A young girl, dressed in mourning, never laid to rest. What makes La Niña de Negro so powerful is that she embodies universal fears. The fear of being forgotten, the grief of losing a child, the unsettling presence of innocence twisted by tragedy. She is both terrifying and heartbreaking, a reminder that not all ghosts are monsters. Some are simply echoes of lives cut short, trying to be remembered. Even today, stories of her continue to surface. People swear that they've seen her in photographs where no one should be, or heard her footsteps when buildings are empty. Skeptics dismiss it as imagination, a trick of the light, or the power of suggestion. But believers will tell you that once you've seen her, once you've felt the weight of those dark, hollow eyes, there's no mistaking it. You have crossed paths with something that lingers. And maybe that's why her legend endures. La Niña de Negro is more than a ghost story. She's a question. Is she a warning, a restless soul, or proof that death doesn't always silence the forgotten? So next time that you find yourself walking through an empty school at night, or passing by an old cemetery where the air feels just a little too heavy, keep your eyes open. Because if you see a small girl, dressed in black, standing perfectly still in the shadows, whatever you do, don't look too long into her eyes. Because some say that if you do, you'll never look away.